Greetings, YouTubers. With so many games on the horizon, we have plenty to look forward to regarding games for the PlayStation. Now, I myself am a PlayStation gamer, and I have been for a few years, ever since we got the PS3 in my household, and even more so after we got the PS4. Some of my very personal favorites include both Injustice games, The Last of Us Part 1 and Marvel's Spider-Man. However, today I want to give my ultimate commentary on Marvel's Spider-Man. This is one of those games that's purely memorable, and I compare it to The Last of Us on so many levels. I will delve into that as we continue with part 1 of this commentary. I really do wish that the creators of Marvel's Spider-Man made a behind-the-scenes documentary on how the game was created, much like The Last of Us, but I'll just have to settle for gameplay footage to show you, as well as artwork and some references from the comic books as well. Now, I think the best place to start is the opening scene in this game. The opening scene shows a spider hanging from its web outside an apartment window in New York, and we are quick to learn that this is Peter Parker's apartment. Now, upon looking around the apartment, you can instantly tell that Peter is a college graduate, but he has his very Peter Parker tendencies. His apartment is a complete mess with dirty clothes everywhere, including Spidey underwear, and you see newspaper clippings from the Daily Bugle pinned to his walls. This shows you all his triumphs as Spider-Man, and it shows that he's fairly experienced and has been doing this at least since high school. I would assume that he's about in his mid-20s, probably about 23, because he notes to Yuri Watanabe that he's been waiting 8 years for the biggest moment of his crime-fighting career to come. He hears over the police radio that the Kingpin is about to be arrested, and upon hearing the news, he jumps out of bed and he makes his breakfast in the most half-assed way possible. He uses his web shooters to make toast, he gets dressed in his Spider-Man suit, and he notices a bill being slipped underneath his door by the landlord, claiming he's due to pay his rent, and apparently he's overdue to pay. But then he jumps out the window and he starts swinging through the city. This is where he gets the phone call from police captain Yuri Watanabe, who tells him that they're about to arrest Fisk. But Peter insists on wanting to be there for that because, like I said, he's been waiting 8 years for it. And this game needs a tutorial, so it gives you a taste of what you're going to face. He reaches Times Square and he fights the first few of Fisk's men until he sees an explosion from Fisk Tower, and on his way to Fisk Tower, he gets a phone call from his boss who says he needs him to come into work. Now, what I love about this tutorial is that it displays Peter just being your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man by throwing quips at the minions, and when he enters Fisk Tower, he fights through more of Fisk's men. But then he learns members of the bomb squad are also Fisk's spies. But my favorite portion of this tutorial is the cell phone conversations that occur because he gets a phone call from Aunt May. It's these personal moments that make the game so special because Peter has people that he loves dearly. And as we all know, Aunt May is one of the many moral compasses in his life. It means there's different relationships in this game, and that's what makes the player connect with it emotionally. Anyways, he makes his way into Fisk's office and tells him not to forget the hyphen between Spider and Man when Fisk is writing his memoir. This is the very first boss battle you get to play through, and in all honesty, the first time I played this, I got my ass kicked a lot. There are minions you need to fight who have shields, you have to deal with rocket launchers, and you have to fight the Kingpin himself. Now, the only way I found that you can fight him is by webbing him up and slamming into him. There's no other possible way that you can do it, and the same goes for any kind of brute character twice your size. The brutes can take a lot of punishment, and you cannot fight them like you would fight other villains. Now, to make this brief, you eventually web up the Kingpin, and he's arrested. Now, after the fight with the Kingpin, I just want to touch on something that I've taken great notice to when playing this game. Peter narrates and speaks out loud to himself, and I love that he's able to do that. It just falls in line with who his character is, and one thing I take notice to each time is that when you exit and quit the game right before an important mission in the story, Peter recounts what you should be doing. It's those little details that make the game that much more personal. It reminds you of who Peter Parker is, and it reminds you that he is like us. He has responsibilities to fulfill, and he doesn't just forget them. Even when you are playing for the day, you return to it, and Peter reminds the player what should be done. Anyways, after the Kingpin battle, Peter heads to work, which just so happens to be with Otto Octavius to do research for prosthetic limbs. Unfortunately, there's a malfunction with the prosthetic just as the grant committee members arrive, and this is what leads to my favorite portion of the game, the puzzles. I know many do not care for the puzzles in this game, but for me, the puzzles are the most interesting and fun part. They allow you to challenge yourself, and they allow you to exercise critical thinking. Without these components, it wouldn't be a Spider-Man game. You have to remember that Peter Parker is a scientist and a detective first, and with that, experiments are part of the game. Shortly after, you're told by Yori to fix up the police towers. Now, I'm one of those people who tries getting all the police towers fixed first before I do anything else. It just helps make things easier later on, especially when you're earning crime tokens, landmark tokens, backpack tokens, base tokens, and research tokens. These are tokens that will help you gain XP, and you can unlock different suits as well. Now is the time where I should mention some of my favorite collectibles from the backpacks that you can earn. A menu from Peter's very first date with Mary Jane Watson, a Nelson and Murdoch business card, a photograph of Peter's late mom and dad, and a newspaper article that Mary Jane wrote for school. Now, I want to mention another piece of the game that makes it feel like the Spider-Man universe. You can listen to Jonah Jameson's podcast, which for the most part consists of Jameson pulling a Rush Limbaugh, yelling and ranting about how Spider-Man is screwing up the city. Now, I'm one of those people who prefers to turn the podcasts off because I personally hate listening to Jameson yelling and complaining. It is something that's greatly annoying for me, and luckily you have an option to turn that off. I never liked political commentary for that particular reason because it does consist of people yelling and screaming and feeling like you're being berated when you disagree with the person commentating. And it has that in this game with Jameson, but luckily it's the option to just turn it off and you don't have to listen to it at all whatsoever if you do not want to. And I personally really love that. Anyways, Peter eventually ends up stopping by Otto's office to fix up his Spider-Man suit, which leads to Otto walking in on him. Peter starts to panic, thinking Otto believes him to be Spider-Man, but Otto leads Peter and you to believe that he thinks you are just Spider-Man's suit crafter. Now, this is an important detail to keep in mind later on as the story progresses. This leads to Otto giving you sketches for a white spider suit, and afterwards you are told to head to a Fisk construction site. This is where you can get some of your first base tokens, and this leads to one of my favorite aspects: taking pictures of landmarks. Some of my favorite landmarks you can get photos of are the Avengers Tower, Josie's Bar, and Wakanda Embassy, all references to Marvel Universe trademarks. When you take a photo of Avengers Tower, Peter notes that all the Avengers are on the West Coast, meaning West Coast Avengers. Shortly after, you get a phone call from Martin Lee claiming that things are almost set up for a party, and when you get to the Feast homeless shelter, you learn it's a surprise birthday party for Aunt May, who works there full-time. Now, walking around the Feast Center is an aspect that I love because you can interact with the various people that live there, including two of the elderly playing a game of chess. After you leave, you are told to head to a Fisk estate, which you discover to be broken into by people dressed as demons. You soon enough discover a camera, and it's a camera that belongs to Peter's ex-girlfriend, Mary Jane Watson. Now, this version of Mary Jane is honestly my all-time favorite, and it's my personal favorite, even more so than the Kirsten Dunst one from the OG Spidey movies with Tobey Maguire. This version of Mary Jane has Dunst's Mary Jane personality morphed with the ultimate Marvel version of her, who is an investigative journalist. It's the most perfect version of Mary Jane Watson we've ever gotten anywhere, and these scenes are honestly the best because you get to play as her. You learn Mary Jane was going undercover to investigate the Fisk estate, which is said to have stolen art pieces. This is where you just get to take photos, walk around, and Mary Jane comments on different artifacts in the room before she interviews the employee there. Soon enough, Mary Jane hides from this woman because this woman has figured out that Mary Jane isn't from the magazine that was supposed to cover the Fisk estate sale. Upon stealthing around, you sneak into a room where you master this puzzle, which unlocks a statue holding files on something called Devil's Breath. And from there, that's when Mary Jane's scene basically ends. Now, what's so special about these Mary Jane stealth playthroughs for me is that you get to see the world through her eyes as well. Shortly after this scene is over, we see Peter and MJ having their conversation, and Mary Jane tells him that she's trying to get out of the building. So you as Peter go and web up various demons, while MJ says that the Devil's Breath was described by Wilson Fisk as Pandora's box because Fisk was told by someone to build a secret research lab for it. And after you web up most of the demons, MJ and the woman whom she interviewed earlier at the Fisk estate end up in a scuffle, and you as Peter need to fight your way out around the demons. Now, this leads to a cut scene of Mary Jane grilling this woman once more regarding the estate sale. Now, there are people that have an issue with this because I've heard people say that they think Mary Jane has no empathy at all here. But I do not think that this is the case because when you're a reporter, you're focused solely on asking the hard questions and challenging people on what they think, what they believe. Good interviewers do this. Just look up any Barbara Walters interview. She's one of the best reporters because she asks the hard questions and she looks to get the answers to tell the story she's looking to tell. And I think that Mary Jane in this sequence is actually really fair, and she's trying to expose that this estate holds stolen goods. And to be quite honest, this woman she's interviewing isn't exactly innocent because whether she's aware or not, she's protecting a business that deals with stolen art pieces. Now, this leads to a texting conversation between Pete and MJ where he asks her to go to dinner with him at this restaurant called Mix. And this is where Mary Jane points out 6 months ago they broke up. And this is even something you learn about when you find one of Peter's backpacks. You find a lease for his apartment, and he reveals that he and Mary Jane, he thought that they would lease this apartment together and move in together, but instead she broke up with him, and at this point, we do not really know why. So, Mary Jane goes to dinner with Peter, and they catch up over some french fries. It is then that Peter reveals to MJ he just wishes to be friends again, but Mary Jane tries to ask him if he knows why they broke up in the first place. Of course, Peter doesn't fully know why because he is so oblivious to this. But this is when the police sirens can be heard and he has to leave. And as Mary Jane leaves the restaurant, we see one of Stan Lee's final cameos where he says, "You guys always were my favorites," which is so sweet because after all, the relationship between Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson was inspired by Stan's real-life romance with his late wife Joan. All the women in Marvel Comics were inspired by Joan Lee because they all emulate something about Joan that Stan loved. It just provides a very sentimental and sweet moment that just further keeps the story going. Now, I'm going to cut it here for today, folks. I'll be back relatively soon with part 2 of this commentary. Until then, God bless and happy gaming. See ya!